Hi everyone. In this video, we're going to talk about ways that you can recover from childhood emotional neglect. And the main focus for this one is if you're a highly sensitive person, which I know a lot of us are. Now, if you're a highly sensitive person, odds are that you experience emotions in a very strong way. So much that you can feel like your emotions are flooding you. Highly sensitive people are naturally born with a nervous system that processes and feels things much more deeply than the average person. And most of them, too, are aware of their own feelings and the feelings of others, which can actually be a pretty powerful gift. However, what happens when you grow up in a family that doesn't value this trait at all? With that, I mean parents who said that you were overreacting for having feelings, or your parents never expressed their own emotions and were uncomfortable when you did too. So as a result, you'd probably get yelled at or just like shrugged off, told to grow up, that's life, etc. Or being labeled as different, a dreamer or a crybaby. Again, it goes back to the second point, because you are sensitive. Unfortunately, as sad as it sounds, it's not uncommon. It's common that a majority of families raise their kids with emotional neglect, a failure to value or respond to emotions. This can create unhealthy outcomes for any child, but especially highly sensitive children. Now, if you're one of the small percentage of people who've never been emotionally neglected, what does it mean? Well, basically, emotional neglect, it happens when a parent fails to respond to a child's emotional needs. It may sound like nothing and it may be often overlooked, right? But actually, it can have a great impact on the child, and it's basically considered abuse. Even though it's not noticeable or memorable like abuse is, it still has the emotional impact which imprints on you for life. Now, often with that too, the lack of a child's emotional response to a parent, it doesn't look unhealthy, right? Parents may take great care of their child in every aspect, but something is missing, something that they can't see. The parent doesn't validate their child's feelings or respond to their child's emotional needs, and that has severe consequences. Emotionally neglected children can end up feeling deeply alone, and as kids, they feel like their needs aren't as important, like their feelings don't matter, or like they should never ask for help because it's perceived as a sign of weakness. And that also goes into the mental health aspect of it too. If they start feeling that as kids, and it develops into something more than emotional abuse, like let's say you end up developing a mental health condition, it can get worse. When they grow up to become young adults, childhood emotional neglect, it can stick around as unnecessary guilt, self-anger, shame, low self-esteem, low confidence, or the sense of being a failure, being flawed. But that's the truth of anyone who grew up with emotional neglect. And if you're a highly sensitive person, if your biology, has made you attuned to emotion, what does emotional neglect do to you? That really is a good question. High sensitivity, the textbook definition is, it's a generic trait. You're either born with it or you're not. You can't acquire it and you can't lose it, right? So once you have it, it's with you for life. So with that being said, emotional neglect doesn't change whether a child is, highly sensitive or not, right? But it does affect highly sensitive children more so than the average child. That's really because emotions are in many ways a highly sensitive person's first language, right? And an emotionally neglectful family basically doesn't speak their language, so they feel like an outsider, they feel left out. While parents, they have their own emotions, they avoid acknowledging them and they avoid expressing them. Pretty much, it's like they divorce themselves from the most important part of their child's life. At best, growing up as a highly sensitive child in an emotionally neglectful household, it's like Being a musician in a world of no music. Basically, it's much worse. It's equivalent to having parents who actively tell you that your music is bad. Imagine being a deeply thoughtful, intensely feeling child growing up in a family that is neither of that. Imagine your intense feelings being ignored on a day to day basis, being discouraged. Imagine that your thoughtfulness is viewed as a weakness. That will damage you psychologically, in addition to being damaged emotionally. But many highly sensitive people don't have to imagine at all. That's often how they are raised, right? And they get used to the kind of emotional neglect, and then, they expect everyone else to do that to them. And that kind of emotional neglect sends a message to them: your greatest strength is not valued here. So they feel like, again, they're out of place and they have to try and do other things to be put into place. No, what I mean by that is that they have to do other things to feel like they have a place there. So pretty much they have to change themselves. Now, 9 ways childhood emotional neglect harms highly sensitive people. Everyone is affected by their childhood environment, whether it's good or bad, trauma, no trauma. But for highly sensitive people, the effect is amplified. As a result, it's pretty reasonable to expect childhood emotional neglect to have an outsized effect on sensitive kids. While not every highly sensitive child who deals with emotional neglect will face all the situations, some of these outcomes they're guaranteed to face at least once or on more than one occasion. The first one, their high sensitivity becomes a joke. Even with their parents, family, friends, right? Comments that a child is too sensitive or, too much of a dreamer, maybe, maybe in good nature, but it can come across as a negative judgment. Think about that. Your siblings probably suffer emotional neglect as well, but they may take it more naturally to the toughen up message than you would because you're highly sensitive. And that makes it easy for them to establish themselves higher up on the pecking order. 3. There's no way to limit how many times you can say highly sensitive children are normal, but it's impossible that if you're told over and over that you're the odd one out, instead you internalize that your emotions aren't right and it doesn't matter. 4. They end up with confidence issues. Given the above points, it's no surprise that a sensitive child can start to doubt and undervalue themselves. Right? Low confidence, low self-esteem. But emotionally neglectful parents often see this as a weak spot too, and pressure the child to be more confident, more independent, without asking them what's wrong, without validating their strengths, weaknesses, and their feelings. 5. They have problems dealing with criticism, don't we all? But for highly sensitive people as a whole, they react strongly to criticism, and criticism is always hard for a child. But for a highly sensitive child, emotional neglect means that they never get to see feedbacks done in a healthy way. And naturally, they can't develop healthy ways to deal with criticism themselves if they never see it modeled at home. The next one, number 6, they experience overwhelming, maybe crashes, panic attacks, maybe a breakdown. All highly sensitive people can become overstimulated by loud or busy environments and overwhelmed by strong emotions. I can relate to that at times. But highly sensitive people as a whole, we learn to manage this through self-care. Often as needed, you get a quiet, safe place to retreat to. It's the same thing with anxiety attacks. You find your safe place. Panic attacks, you find your safe place to retreat to. If you're outside, a certain coffee shop, for me, if I see a Tim Hortons, I go into one and I just sit down for a few minutes. It helps. For highly sensitive kids, that's only possible if the parent or parents are understanding. And usually they're not. They end up being emotionally neglectful parents instead. They see their child as overreacting, and they may even get angry at the child, and this may overwhelm the child even more and cause a panic attack or a sense of panic all the time and fear in the child. Number 7, they can feel profound loneliness. I can relate to this too. When your emotional needs aren't met, Your emotions are out of whack. You feel like you're not good enough. You'll never be good enough. No one seems to understand you. You quickly become isolated. And you may feel alone in the world, but you're not alone. You may feel like it, but you're not alone. There's always someone who will feel the same as you, someone you can connect with. It just takes time. But if you're a kid, that's hard because even trying to make friends when you feel like that is not easy. Number eight, they can feel unable to ask for help. Yeah, that's really true. Any child who suffers from emotional neglect or abuse, they learn that they shouldn't ask for help because they wouldn't be taken seriously, it wouldn't be given, or because it appears as weak. They'll think they're weak, right? This is especially damaging to highly sensitive children because they need to learn to speak up for their needs in a world that doesn't understand them. Remember that. Speak up for their needs in a world that doesn't understand them. And our final point is something I can relate to. They feel anxiety.